So Janssen is one of the companies that I've always seen as kind of leading the way in this area. Yourself and some of the folks that work in this area with you are people I know well and have talked to many times. And you just know they're incredibly passionate about this topic and really care about what they're doing. And your company has done a lot to really advance this issue. And I've had conversations with you in the past about some of these. But can you basically take us through, for all the listeners who maybe aren't aware, some of the things that Janssen has done and is currently doing to recruit those more diverse patients into your trials?
Sure, sure. So, for Janssen, we're the pharmaceutical company of J&J. Our patients really are our purpose. Without the patients, we really don't exist. So, we have a vision to make sure that we're leading, transformations and removing stumbling blocks for participants to receive our medications and, in this context, participate in our trials. So one of the things that Janssen as an organization officially started about, we're going into our third year 2 years ago, was an official, organization within the organization and strategy. And how are we going to tackle this notion of, the lack of diversity and representation in clinical trials? And so, if you speak to colleagues at other organizations, some organizations are ahead of us and have been at this for many years. And, some are kind of right where we are with really trying to move the needle internally and organize internally. And some are, behind and like they're getting their bearings with a pursuit of diversity and inclusion in trials. So we're thrilled to, I'm thrilled to really have the opportunity to stand behind and help move the organization in something that they really would, we really would like to do in having diversity in our trials. A few things that we've done in thinking about how do we do this? What does it actually take is, you have to be very strategic and tactical with it. So in our strategy, one of the things that we spent most of our time understanding is what could we be doing that we're not currently doing that's going to help, with diversity and inclusion? And I mean that from a drug development perspective. So a great example of this, and I think Sade or maybe Robin mentioned it, is something as simple as taking a moment to pause and look at your protocol and understand, are you inadvertently excluding certain groups of people because of, unnecessary barriers to their participation? Maybe it's a biometric measure, or maybe it's something as, simple as selecting sites that are only open between, the hours of 11 and 3, or, something that just creates impossible barriers for people to participate when they have other, life circumstances to participate in. So culture and internal culture and change management has been where we've spent most of our time thus far. Another piece that we started last year, but I think it's really, COVID again, teaching a lot of people a lot of lessons in 2020 has really, really, really underscored the importance of gaining trust and raising awareness. And so it's important that we have these opportunities to engage with communities and talk to them about clinical research, try to, provide them information. Like I mentioned, the gentleman that I spoke to for about an hour and a half, we won't always have an hour and a half to dedicate, but still getting out and making sure that people have their questions answered and addressed and have the right information. So we have a campaign, it's called Research Includes Me, where there's a website, it's informational, and it's meant to provide high-level information about clinical research with the lens of, a minority visitor to the site. So we created it with patients. We co-created it, I guess you could say, with patients, particularly from diverse backgrounds, to give them the information that we heard they wanted. And so that's something that we launched earlier. What was that, last month? And we'll continue to build upon with this, kind of educational outreach. Another thing that we have done, and there's a really good example of this over the past 3 years. So CISCRP, the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research Participation, they have they had events called Aware for All events, but it's kind of morphed into this consortium or collaboration across industry where, it's the banding together of sponsors and other organizations too, to promote clinical trial information education in primarily communities of color, but generally. And so we're a participant there. We actually started it back in, I think it's 2018, and have been a contributor and collaborator with CISGRIP and others as well since then. So those are two things, looking at internal change management. What can we be doing that we're not connecting with communities through some of our own homegrown events and, Aware for All and other things. And maybe the last thing that I'll offer up, because this comes up quite a bit, is how are we growing the pool of principal investigators and researchers into the fold that have the patients that we're looking for? And oftentimes we hear patients want to go to a doctor that looks like them. And that's true for some people in some segments of the population, but certainly not everybody. But it's important that we're bringing more people that have, access to the patients, connection with the patients. Again, this is a humility, empathy, heart conversation. And we know there are some really good HCPs out there that may not even be from minority backgrounds themselves that can contribute to this pool. So it's identifying those gems, if you will, and bringing them into the research fold. So doing some training to kind of bring them over is another area that we're focusing on as well.
Okay, and before I move on, let's look at our third and final poll question. And I'm just trying to get some sense from where our audience thinks that the problem with poor minority recruitment, where that actually lies. So, and I don't want to feel like I'm placing blame here in the way I ask the question, but what do you feel is most responsible for the lack of minority participation in trials? Do you think it's the lack of patient trust in sponsor companies, which we've talked about, sponsor companies not engaging the right sites, whether it's our current recruitment practices that maybe aren't doing some of the things that we've talked about here today, or whether it's a lack of guidance from regulators or something else entirely? I'm just curious to know where most of our audience lies on that issue. And Cassandra, one of the things I was hoping you could talk about a little bit today, the last time you and I talked, we talked about a LOTUS trial that you guys conducted at Janssen, and it was a very successful trial. You had a goal of recruiting minority patients and did very, very well. But what amazed me the most about that is that it wasn't the company going out and saying we're looking for a treatment in this area and designing a protocol and inclusion/exclusion criteria and going out and recruiting patients and at some point saying, oh, we should get some minorities involved. This was a well thought out, well designed right from the very beginning, saying we want to make this happen and we're going to make it happen. And then basically everyone on that team pulling together and accomplishing it. Can you just, I don't know how deeply you want to get into it. Maybe you can keep it at a slightly higher level, but give us a little bit of insight into how you guys did that and what your thinking was going into that and how you would make it successful.
Sure. No, thank you for bringing that up. That is one of the darling, examples of when you plan in advance for diversity, it really can happen. So I wasn't part of that team, but the team honestly has been recognized because they had this goal and this focus from the very beginning. So long story short, a few things they did, and I think one of the most important lessons that we, saw in LOTUS and carry forward is that planning from the beginning. So they did that in every aspect of study design, site selection, partnership, very strong partnership with advocacy, community outreach, pulling things through all the way through the study. And that's why they were so successful. So just to give everybody some metrics on what the study was able to achieve. So it was in lupus, and we know lupus affects women of color at a greater rate than non-women of color. And the study team, first thing, aside from planning from the beginning, they set in their minds, here's what we'd like to reach in terms of diverse participation in a study. And so they set that threshold and said, okay, now we have something to aspire to, and everybody bought in to that number, and that's what they kind of had as their beacon, if you will, to try to work towards. The other thing they did, and we hear this a lot, is they talked to the sites about the need for diversity in the study. And we hear that a lot from investigators, that if we don't proactively talk to them, when, sponsors finally do, they say, well, why didn't you just tell me that? I could have helped. I could have been more intentional. And so Lotus, one of the things they did is they really set that tone from the very beginning, from feasibility, really, all the way through that, diversity and enrollment of non-white women was going to be really important for the study. They were, enabled the sites to do so, and had that dialogue and conversation. And where they ended up was with almost half, it was about 45% of participants who enrolled globally were women of color or non-white participants. And so those numbers do not come easily, but they also completed the study, on time, because that's another thing people think about. Well, how long did it take? With planning, they were able to complete it on time. They did, complete it on the budget they planned for, and they moved it forward. So it can definitely happen. But that's a really great case study and example.